Are you a history enthusiast looking for another new podcast? Dive deep into the captivating stories of Canada's past with a Historia Canadiana, as their hosts Patrick and Mackenzie work through this nation's history in a different and approachable fashion. Historia Canadiana unravels fascinating figures and pivotal events that have shaped the Great White North through a literary lens to offer listeners a richer understanding of Canada's heritage. Subscribe to the Historia Canadiana podcast, where history comes alive.
Historia Canadiana is recorded on the unceded lands of the Kanien'kehá:ka First Nation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Historia Canadiana, the show that's the little light in my week, especially considering that we're expecting like 20 centimeters of snow here in Montreal, I think, in like 2 days. So, truly, this is just me hoping for better times with my friend and co-host, Mackenzie, who decided right at the start of me recording this episode that he was going to go leave somewhere else. And so I'm just padding for time while he's doing this instead of pausing the recording because I'm just a dweeb for things like this.
Sorry about that.
He's back, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello.
I certainly didn't say anything bad about you behind your back.
That's okay. I'm sure it's all very valid points.
So first of all, before we get started into our topic, we'd love to thank our patrons who help support the show and, just keep us going in small ways. So Keen, Alex, Jessica, Elise, Tommy, James, and Noah, thank you very much. And if you want to support the show, I know, right? And if you want to help support the show, you can do so for as little as $1 or $3 a month, and you can be part of an exclusive club that gets access to the Pop Canada episodes that, is a more unhinged version of this, if that's your thing. Especially with the holiday seasons coming up, treat yourself for something that's about the price of a pack of gum. So, good on you.
You could literally pay $3 and then probably download all the episodes and never have to subscribe to it again.
You absolutely
if you're desperate for content.
Really encouraging strong and consistent listenership.
I'm just saying.
No, it's true. So today we're going to be talking about the timeliest of topics, flus and pandemics, because people haven't talked about it.
As usual,
it's not
a couple years late to the conversation.
Look, technically we're 100 years late to this conversation. Like, it depends which way you slice it. But yeah, specifically, we're going to be talking about what's called the Spanish flu, although that's somewhat of a misnomer, and talk about shocking, although not that surprising, parallels with the most recent pandemic that happened, especially in relation to Canada. And as far as cultural items are concerned, you have access to this through archive.org again, but we're specifically going to be looking at a theater play that came out 20 years ago.
We love archive.org.
Oh, it's great. And do you know they're actually trying to shut it down? By they, I mean big publishing companies.
Oh, of course they are.
There you go. Why do you think, Mac?
Fucking big publishing business. I swear to God. It's the dumbest shit. You know what's the worst fucking part about all these big publishing companies? So little of the actual money you're paying for these goddamn subscriptions goes back to the author. So, literally, never feel bad about getting free articles online.
Oh,
never.
The author's not getting paid for it anyway.
Yeah. And most authors will literally just give it to you for free if you ask.
Yes. Actually, that's an excellent pro tip.
And I know this is a very small part of our audience that are super academic and with all this stuff, but all these internet archives is a treasure. You want to know why? Because as part of their internet archive, they've got the Scooby-Doo films on there, and that's hilarious.
But it boggles my mind because it's literally just a library. They're not selling them for free. You have a time limit. It's the same thing as Spotify or Apple. You can't just do whatever you want with the books, right? It's a library. So it's literally an attack on libraries in this case. which is the worst type of attack. Like, information should anyway. Whatever. That's not the point of the episode.
No, but yeah,
it sucks.
We'd be
But
here
anyway,
all day.
yes.
We stand
The point
libraries
is-
here,
Oh, big time. But yeah, archive.org.
especially any
support.
libraries that keep Scooby-Doo artifacts on there.
Like, literally, it's what allows us to do the show because they have digitized copies of so many of the old books that are not widely available, right? Just in paper editions anymore, or they're too expensive. So, yeah.
Stand up for Internet
Anyway.
Archive today.
The point is, we're going to be talking about a play that's called Unity 1918, which is all about, of course, how the Spanish flu specifically hit a small town called Unity in Saskatchewan. It's a fictionalized account of, isolation, wink, wink, nod, nod, themes and stuff. All right. So just out of curiosity, like, what do you know about the Spanish flu in Canada, or at least just in general, actually, the Spanish flu, Matt?
The Spanish flu?
Yeah.
I know a little bit. So I know a bit as far as like how do I say it? Like, obviously I've heard of it. I know its sort of background. I know about its effect both post World War One, but also pre-World War II.
Okay. In what sense?
Well, because the Spanish flu sort of was one of those things that sort of put people on the back foot. And again, when these flus come out, any groups that aren't hit with the flu or are a bit safer from the flu are usually pretty targeted. And guess which culture has a thing about being clean and taking baths and good public health? Take a guess.
I wonder which.
Starts with a J.
A lot of. Perhaps a group that was also targeted during World War II, perhaps?
There you go. So it
Yep.
played its own part in not only giving fascist governments a thing to target, like how badly people handled the Spanish flu, but also a way to demonize other groups. There's a whole, yeah. All right, so no, specifically because it's the Spanish flu, didn't it help play a larger part with what's his name, Francisco de Franco,
Right.
San Francesco de Franco for Germany.
There you go. For Spain, but whatever. But yeah, it is kind of interesting that the Jewish thing comes back, because weren't they also targeted after the Black Death or the plague in the 14th century?
Yeah, well, I don't know specifically if they were targeted, but I'm imagining they would have been, because just like what happened with the Black Plague, these things usually happen on repeat. I mean, and we can talk about today even, anti-Semitism did come on the rise a lot more during and after COVID.
And anti-Asian sentiments.
And anti-Asian sentiments as carriers, that's 100%. Like, diseases and epidemics usually just make a really good target, especially, well, not just diseases, but any of these wars, as we like to call them. Wars on drugs, on terror, on disease. They're a breeding ground for racism and xenophobia.
It's almost like military conquest is hand in hand with targeting groups in particular.
With othering people.
Interesting. Anyway,
yeah,
we're not going to discuss that any further.
It was the xenophobia of all foreigners.
Yep, absolutely. But yeah, and do you know specifically like how it would have affected Canada, or not really? Like, do you know more about it in general?
I mean, I can guess how it would have come through. Like, how are you saying how it got to Canada, or?
Yeah, or just like its impact here. Like, do you know anything about that? Or?
I mean, I can extrapolate. It's Canada, so obviously if the disease is coming in, it's probably going to come in by boat.
Yeah.
It's going to come in through the Maritimes first, Halifax, Newfoundland, Labrador, that sort of stuff, Nova Scotia. Going to make its way down the St. Lawrence River, obviously. It's going to hit Quebec. And from there, it's going to spread out into major population centers. And that's probably going to cause widespread panic among Canadians. And it's the thing about Canada that we always have to remember, just like where I'm living right now in Australia, there's a lot of small towns. And diseases are definitely much more dangerous to small towns. Or they can be. Like, they spread a lot in big cities, but they can then be managed. If it spreads through a small town, the whole town could just, boom, puff of smoke, it's gone.
Absolutely. It is kind of interesting. Like, I feel like the Spanish flu really only hit the way it did in part because of the war, which is maybe like an obvious thing to say, but I think it helps put things into context, especially for people who just went through the pandemic, of course, or like obviously the COVID pandemic, but it didn't emerge or spread because of a war. It emerged because we're a more connected world than ever before, which wasn't the case in 1918, right?
Well,
But those,
actually, if we
well, go ahead.
like not to get to tinfoil hat conspiracy theory,
Mm-hmm.
most sources point to the fact that COVID-19 was it's partially an environmental release, but also partially was sort of like manufactured.
Interesting. And what do you mean by that?
Like, I'm not going to say it was weaponized, but we do know like it was being researched in a lab.
Oh,
And
okay,
so,
yeah, in that sense. Yeah.
yeah. And while not a war, and while not a typical war, you can't say China and the US aren't in a sort of digital information war.
Right. Hmm. I don't, yeah, I get it. Like, I get what you're saying. And obviously, I don't think you're advocating like a conspiracy theory, like you're saying.
No.
But yeah, but nevertheless, like, I don't think COVID was researched, like you're saying, in a lab and being thing, but I don't know, and I'm not going to say much on it because I don't know how much it was actually like deliberately sent out, right?
And
Or if it
the
was
other
like an
part of
accident.
actually,
Yeah.
it was, and I think if we're talking about the spread of COVID-19, at least in the at least in the States, like taking this from a sort of US perspective, it spread as much as it did because of a civil war between Democrats and Republicans.
That's true. That is true.
Like Republicans railing against having their freedoms taken away, and then Democrats fucking doing whatever they did, buying all the toilet paper, I guess.
Like they did here. It's not.
Which is also stupid. We shouldn't be using toilet paper. It's absolutely useless. It doesn't actually do anything. We still got a bunch of shit on our assholes. We should all just have bidets and wash ourselves with soap and water. This is your public health PSA, people. God damn it.
The last thing I was expecting you to say, but okay.
Fucking tired of this bullshit.
Love, like, even in the face of millions of people dying, both in this last pandemic and in the Spanish flu, we still find a way to just laugh mercilessly.
That's the human condition, baby. That's why we made so many jokes about the movie about the guy who made the worst weapon ever to be created.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why everybody had a bunch of Oppenheimer's it's gonna have an atomic nut in there, you know?
Was that a thing?
Yes. Yes, God. Literally a thing went around for a while where people thought it was gonna the bomb was gonna go off at the same time as tea went off.
That's really funny. Honestly, I'm disappointed now that wasn't a part of the movie.
It's the same reason why in Avengers Endgame was coming around talking about the destruction of half the population of the universe. Everybody was making a joke about sticking a little man up an anus. We just laugh in the face of things.
Like it helps to actually like make it easier in some ways. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. The Korean War gave us the drama comedy mash. And now we're going to talk about the Spanish flu. We're going to laugh at that too. We're going to laugh at the imbecilic way that people handled it. Let's send in the soldiers with guns to fight back against the pathogen. Dumbasses.
All things considered, I think it's not idiotic in the context of the Spanish flu because of the context in which it happened and the time in which it happened. I think it was idiotic if we compare it to today, right? Because we know from history how to deal with this. But the Spanish flu was a time before there was actually like a mass effective vaccine for the flu, right? That came later. And so, like, I think they did the best they could considering how relatively little connected compared to today people were, and considering the fact that there was no vaccine. So, like, yes, could it have been handled better? Probably. But I don't think it's fair to say idiotic. Yeah.
No.
I don't know. Maybe that's just me who's being too sympathetic for people from 100 years ago.
Yeah, as usual, I'm nice to the people in modern times. Patrick's nice to the old people from 100 years ago. It balances itself out. None of us like the future.
I'll blame old people for a lot of things, but like I don't know if I can blame them for this because like it's just coming back to the context here. One of the reasons why the Spanish flu came into Canada was because of soldiers coming back from the war. And like you could say that the idiocy of the war was the fact that it even existed, right? It was just an imperial
Yeah.
circle jerk. But and also the way that they were going about their military endeavors, which is to say trench warfare for a lot of it, which is a breeding ground for disease, right? Like
Mhm.
obviously that was terrible. And then those diseases that were bred in the trenches were then brought back to wherever people were living, right? And that's how it entered into um, Canada, right? Was soldiers returning home after World War One. And so, like you're saying, yeah, it would have hit Halifax and Montreal first because those were the ports of entries for Canada. And then again, more than probably it would have if it was just a regular epidemic or flu, because people had come from all over the country to fight in the war. As they were going back to their small towns, that's where it hit in remote areas that if it had spread without such a major influx of people and movement of people that the war caused, they probably never would have been hit, right? Like Newfoundland and Labrador was isolated enough still from the rest of the world that, you know, if it had just been a normal day at the office where a flu erupted in, you know, the middle of nowhere, probably they wouldn't have been hit or as much. Um, but yeah, as it stands, about 50,000 people in Canada would actually die from this, which is huge, of
Mm.
course. And because of the worldwide implications of it, apparently it's something like 21 million people died worldwide. Um, Although the numbers are very contested because at the start of the pandemic, flu was not actually a reportable disease. Like no one, if you died, you didn't die of the flu, even though that's maybe what caused it, right? And again, you can find this modern parallel here between how
Yeah.
people like actually reported on COVID cases, which probably would make the numbers a lot higher. Um, and by the end of the Spanish flu, there were just so
Mhm.
many cases that doctors often just didn't report it because they didn't have time. And so the numbers are probably much higher than 50,000.
Mhm.
But they were just chalked up to something else, natural causes, which technically I guess is true just because the flu is like a natural pathogen. But who's to say?
Who's to
I don't
say?
know if you have anything to add on that, but that's kind of like how it entered into Canada. And to me, that makes sense, which is why I was saying at the beginning of the episode, like I feel like it only existed or it can only exist on the scale that it did in the context of World War One. I can't imagine it having that big of a worldwide effect outside of just World War One. I don't know if that makes sense.
Except for the big worldwide effect it had a
Yeah,
couple of years ago.
that's the thing. Like because a couple of years ago we were used to traveling on this like literally worldwide, which people weren't. We barely had planes in 1918, right?
Mhm.
like like that was
Honestly,
not something.
these I
Yeah, go
think
ahead.
the context is for sure important, but I think more than anything else, both cases just point to the greater factor in the spreads of these flus
Hmm.
and the Black Plague before and everything else is just a lack of actual structured healthcare and a proper
Yes.
respect for that structure in healthcare.
Yeah.
Like people don't realize it's still only been 150 years maybe since we were throwing our shit in the street.
Yes. Exactly. Like
So like I think
modern
yeah, context
sanitation.
sure. Yeah, World War One context sure that's great, and I would like will not call them like they're not idiots for that,
Yeah.
but they are idiots insofar that they'll this way we're still idiots today for not actually like following the basic standards of hygiene and healthcare.
I don't know. Like I feel like they could have they knew, but there's also a question of like how people were still kind of considering how best to manage just the explosions in population that were happening in the 20th century and post-industrialization,
Mhm.
right? Like even if they knew, trying to implement that on a countrywide scale is a massive endeavor. Um,
Yeah, so it was the same with COVID. We still gave people with COVID shit.
That's true. That is true. Yeah.
Like it, and I'm not saying it's like this. I'm not saying people handled it poorly, handled it well, or anything else. But I am trying to make it clear that like the context does make it really hard to sort of. The context does give me some sympathy for them. They're coming out of a World War I situation, but again, that just speaks to they didn't handle burial rites properly. Then they didn't handle the carrying of the dead properly. Then, which is again a lesson they would have fucking learned from the bubonic plague.
Yeah. Yeah. You're absolutely
Like
right.
this, the Black Death. Like these are like it's the idiocy is not me because of the specific time. The idiocy is just a general human idiocy of we can't learn our fucking lesson.
It is kind of interesting.
It's the
because
SpongeBob meme, you know? We got to teach you this lesson again, old man. How many times are we going to have to learn? Like, don't, even before you say, we still haven't learned to properly take care of the dead. How many of those things in the retirement homes during COVID-19 were discovered to just like stack the dead bodies somewhere?
Yeah.
God damn.
I mean, that's yeah. Part of that is also because of a lack of oversight. Like we know, but people just chose not to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's again a problem with our understanding of how to make healthcare work.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fair.
And hygiene.
Yeah.
So that's when I say moronic. Like I mean, all the handling of diseases are moronic because nobody ever learns the lesson of the last disease.
Yeah. Yeah. But what they did learn of this is actually kind of is trying to establish a centralized health system in Canada, right? From the Spanish flu, that's kind of where emerged the need to say like, okay, we need to get on the same page if something like this happens again, because before it was like almost a provincial or even a regional question, right? Even municipal, where people just kind of figured it out. A lot of health systems were managed by priests and nuns still at this time and would continue for some time, but having like a standard, yeah, I guess, or like they formed last rites, but mostly nuns. Yeah. But a lot of this, was very much brought about because of the trauma of the Spanish flu. So there was some positive element that came out of it, even if, of course, you can have problems with Canada's modern system of health because there are a lot of them. But that lesson was learned, right? Say like we can't have this happen again because it would be, it would almost cause the deaths of tens of thousands of people.
Yeah, we definitely learned that lesson, sure.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, the you could say that the issue with the COVID-19 pandemic was less the fact that the centralized healthcare didn't exist. Like it did exist, but it had issues with its management and actually implementing its ideas. But at least it existed.
Yeah, it existed. And then maybe next time we'll actually have it so people listen to the centralized one. People learn that lesson. Who knows?
Can you ever stop individual stupidity though?
No. That's why you got to idiot-proof things.
Bring back lobotomies and stuff like that.
No, fuck yeah. Let's do it there, bud. I'll get one if you get one. Some people get matching tattoos. Me and Patrick get matching lobotomies, baby.
Full frontal lobotomy.
So let's probably get back to the rest of the episode. Spanish flu in Canada.
But the last thing I want to mention before we get into the play itself, which I think touches upon a lot of the ideas that we've already started to talk about, is what people again don't necessarily remember from this particular moment is, especially now in a world where the flu is very manageable, right? Obviously it still kills people, especially the elderly, but in a post-vaccine world, it's a relatively manageable or very manageable disease. But sorry, go ahead. You looked like you were going to say something.
I love some of these notes just for like the irony. At the beginning of the epidemic, flu was not a reportable disease. By the end, doctors are too inundated to comply with newly legislated reporting requirements. Households hid infection for fear that they would. Did you mention that one? I can't remember.
Nope, go ahead.
Households hid infection for fear that they would be isolated and wage earners kept from work. Symptoms would be so mild that some sufferers were never diagnosed, and the death certificates of many others would have listed as the cause not the flu, but the pneumonia that followed it. Oh, geez.
Yes.
I will say, though,
Think of
looking at
anything.
that one, yeah, in Canada specifically, that was a problem, but I don't think it was as bad as anywhere else because Trudeau did do the thing of like, let's just get money out to everybody who needs it right now. Like, it's gonna fuck
And of
the
course,
economy
people
over
abused
really.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
people abused it, but at least like people did have it who needed it, sort of
Yes.
thing.
Yeah.
But that's still
Mostly-
funny.
Yeah. Mostly the people who abused it were major corporations who just wanted more money than they actually needed,
Yeah.
and not like the single mother who actually needed to live.
Yeah. So we learned a little bit of a lesson there, just like a tiny one.
Smidge. Right.
Despite
But yeah,
attempts at quarantine, no part of the country escaped infection. The isolated communities along Labrador's coast were probably the hardest hit, losing perhaps a third of their population. Makes me think of all those northern communities that had people suddenly flock in to try and run away from the disease, and then they brought it with them.
Interesting. Here's another one, another parallel to the modern version. Thought at the time to have originated in Spain, the disease actually probably started in Canton, right? And was carried to Europe by Chinese trench diggers and was spread to North America after the Great War. So that we already talked about, but this idea of like where it actually originated.
I know
And
where it
the
came
whole-
from. It's the Wuhan flu, baby.
There you go. Right? Like
That means any of the Chinese people, they're gonna have it.
that's the thing, right? That whole discourse is so fascinating because I didn't mention it in the notes, but part of the reason why we specifically identified Spain as a place where it came from is because we, first of all, the first like European cases were identified there, which tells you a lot about, you know, what is considered important is when Europeans actually hit on it. I was talking about it with Kimmy the other days. Oh, it matters now that Europeans are affected by it, but whatever. Yeah. But also, and this comes back to the idea of warfare that you were talking about, is that the Spanish were not necessarily super friendly with everyone else, right? And you know, the Allies, or at least the Western powers, were kind of antagonistic towards the Spanish. And so it became a propaganda thing, right? Of like, we're going to fuck over the Spanish here, right? And say that the flu came from them and further antagonize them. So, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Because again, we just use that all the time. Terrible. Anyway, the last thing I wanted to mention, I had started, but like, because people don't necessarily think about this, is, you know, influenza is not usually like that serious, but at the time, right, it seemed that this particular strain of influenza was particularly impactful and particularly powerful to the point where it even impacted those that were in the prime of their lives, right? Again, creating another parallel with the pandemic we just went through.
Pandemics.
Yep.
Fuck yeah.
Exactly. So I just wanted to like bring that up as another thing that is important to know, like just to give context, because people, I think, when they think of the flu, they don't necessarily think of something particularly deadly anymore. Yeah. So you read part at least
as usual. I read smatterings of Unity.
You're in the end of the semester. It's fine.
My mental load is so low right now. I cannot tell you how many times those last couple of days when we were like doing planning stuff, I was just sitting in front of my desk and I swear to God, my thought processing was going read, click box, scroll, read, click box, check for pretty green colors. That was all my brain could accomplish.
That's about
but sure, let's make teachers work 24/7 and have them come in over the weekend to teach kids.
For basically minimum wage.
For less than minimum wage. So minimum that you can't even save.
Nice. I like that. I think that's a smart idea. Yeah. And then we wonder why nobody wants to do it.
God, why can't teachers just be good? We need more teachers.
You're passionate about it. Shouldn't that be enough?
And you're passionate about being a dickhead. Shouldn't that be enough? You don't need a 30%
mean,
raise.
it is enough. I do appreciate the passion that I have for being a dickhead.
Passion I have for being a total moron. Woo! I'm gonna radicalize the children, baby.
What were your initial thoughts of Unity 1918, which was written by Kevin Kerr in 2002 and first put on in that same year in Vancouver, I believe? But what were your initial thoughts of this play and
My
what it was
initial
playing around?
thoughts.
Initial thoughts. I Mike Tyson'd it.
Yeah. Hold on, I have to borrow it again from Internet Archive because it's basically a library and should be treated as such, a place of public learning and access to education.
Mm-hmm. But like, just while you're
We're
loading
getting
on,
very political with this.
like, I'm sorry, but pandemics are a political issue. Like, it's not. We talked about this just the other day.
I think it's pretty interesting. I think it's pretty. It takes that interesting thing of a play of not having many stage directions, which is actually very interesting. So it provides itself well to different interpretations. So for those who are not literary scholars, for my mom Elise out there, as we're going to start saying, when you're studying plays, you can. There's sort of two ends of opposite. So there's two ends of a spectrum for studying for when plays are written, how they're written. The first is very specific Tennessee Williams style direction of what to do. If you read a Tennessee Williams play, so Streetcar Named Desire, Captain Hot Tin Roof, Glass Menagerie, it is very specific. You look like this, you act like this, you talk like this. If it says 10-second pause, it really does mean a 10-second pause.
Yeah, because the performance is part of the meaning in this case.
And the stage directions are a part of the meaning too.
Yes.
Like these are very much authors with a certain vision. On the opposite end of that spectrum, you have plays like this one, where very little.
Or Shakespeare.
Yeah, Shakespeare's another one who's pretty good, who's pretty known for this. Very little stage directions. There's very little cues to sort of tell people how to read and perform. And it's mostly led up to directorial and then actor interpretation. And it's this isn't just plays, this is any kind of like film, studio, TV process. You know, other examples of the Tennessee Williams model, Alfred Hitchcock famously always said that his actors were just models for him to use at his will. Aaron Sorkin dialogue is infamous for no ad-libbing, no improvisation. You just deliver it.
I would imagine that Quentin Tarantino is probably similar.
Yeah, Tarantino is similar. And then you have other sides of the spectrum, shows that are famous for the constant improvisation in their writing and everything else. I just can't remember the specific names and examples right now. But there are some Mike Schur and Greg Daniels. So The Office, Parks and Recreation, Brooklyn Nine-Nine's got some of it. Yeah, obviously, they still have a script, but they have a lot of improv in their shows too.
Who's the guy who made 40-Year-Old Virgin and all of that, who produced it?
Shit.
Knocked Up. That guy, not Adam McKay, but anyway, he's known for a lot of improv. But anyway.
Judd Apatow.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, more dramatic things, you'll often find lots of stage direction. More comedic things will often leave a lot of room for improv. That's how it goes. Yeah. But anyway, so this is the case of lots of room for interpretation, which I think actually works really well with being a story about the pandemic, because you could probably take Unity, give it some minor tweaks, and set it in the year 2019.
Exactly. Right. And I think that's kind of interesting that
it would be Unity, a millennium, a century, and a year later.
Right. But I feel like this kind of like, both on the storytelling perspective, for those of you who don't know, like Unity is supposed to be a place in Saskatchewan in the context of the play. I don't know if it actually exists. I didn't look it up. Yes, it actually does exist. And obviously, being in the prairies, it's very isolated, right? So the actual place mirrors the context of isolation and needing to separate yourself from the world, right? In order to heal from this pandemic or from this flu, because there's no vaccine, right? It's as close to a vaccine as you're going to get is quarantine.
Your
Right.
face is a pandemic.
But I think that that's kind of interesting as well, because I didn't think about it until now, but the idea of a lack of stage direction and description does kind of mirror that on a formalistic sense as well, right? You're not situated in any way, shape, or form, right? Whether it's in a claustrophobic setting or a wide open space, like usually having a very clear cut description and setting and kind of stage direction, like you're saying, situates you much better, right? Whereas only having dialogue, I feel like it isolates the characters, both as having unique voices, but also physically isolates you and the reader and the characters as like these people who are operating on their own and not within a wider space, right? Which is what a pandemic and that tends to do, right? I don't know. Am I pushing too far on this? Do you get where I'm
No,
going?
no. Yeah, I think I got it. I'm getting I'm picking up what you're putting down, home slice.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Well,
But
and also, yeah, like allowing interpretation in the town allows you. It's a very specific town for sure, but it can then become any town. Like this is a really good
exactly.
play to sort of, and like Shakespeare, like you can do many different types of adaptations for this play. The same way that many people have taken different views to Shakespeare. That's how we got Othello with lions and stuff, lions and a meerkat and a talking warthog.
Mhm.
But no, and I think this is actually, and the other thing I was sort
Hamlet.
of noticing, Hamlet, sorry, not Othello, Hamlet. Othello is something else.
Yeah. Anyway, go
Anyway,
ahead.
but I think another really interesting part is the sort of structure where the scenes are almost more like vignettes.
Yep.
Like
Say
it's
more about that.
nine,
What do you?
the train station. So, like for, I don't know if have we really talked about vignettes before.
I don't think so. Actually, it's never come
Okay,
up in any of them. Yeah. Go
so this
ahead.
is going to be a great theoretical episode for you guys. First, you got a lot of strong, funny political commentary. Now you're going to get some good education,
Let's
straight from
go.
the teacher man himself. So, a vignette is basically a fancy word for like a very short story almost, or a scene
Yes.
really.
Yeah.
A vignette is traditionally like a very
Sketch.
small scene. Yeah, it's a sketch, a scene, a slice of life. And so when we did sunshine sketches, actually, there was an overarching plot for sure, but it was also very much a series of vignettes about life in this
Yes.
small town. And so this play, while it also definitely has an underlying plot about the pandemic and everything else, is also just as much about the different slices and moments of life of people living in a pandemic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, most sitcoms take this style. Actually, it's just that their vignettes are 20 minutes, but they always have that
Yeah.
underlying plot of the relationship. Or in The Office, it becomes about the closing of the company and all that sort of stuff.
Mhm.
But they're still vignettes. Like we're still mostly focused on the day-to-day aspects of their lives.
Yeah.
And so that's what this play sort of takes. Again, sort of playing into this idea of it's an experience. It's everybody's experience. It can be anybody. You can throw yourself into almost any character.
Yeah. Going off of that idea, because it's interesting because a lot of the way that like the vignettes of TV shows take like a classic sitcom, like The Big Bang Theory or whatever, right? Or The Simpsons. Things, no matter like how weird things get, right? Like I saw you roll your eyes at The Big Bang Theory. Like I get it, but it's just like the
Bang
point.
Theory.
Formalistically, the point still remains where like no matter how weird things get or how funny things get in each of these shows, things always return to normal after, right?
Mhm.
Because despite the overarching plot, you still have some characters that you need to like identify
Yeah.
with and right.
Yeah.
And what
No.
I feel
Leonard is never actually going to leave the apartment because of Sheldon's total assholery.
right, exactly. Bart is never going to grow up into an adult. At
Bart is
least not
never
permanently.
actually going to grow in general. Like he's never going to become smart.
Exactly. Right. So what I feel is kind of interesting with this play is that it opens up to this idea of a vignette, which for again, people, I feel like this is maybe for some people who are more literarily inclined who might recognize this, where it seems to open up to this daily life of like, okay, well, things always return to normal. And by the end of the day, right, there's this monotony to living in Unity, Saskatchewan, because it's in the middle of the fucking prairies and nothing happens, right? An atomic bomb could go off and no one would notice. But as the play progresses, you see this disruption of the norm, right? In a way that kind of exists in like a supernatural type of way. There's this haunting presence in the background. At first, you think it's the war, because in some ways it is, but then as the play progresses and, well, a soldier arrives home for his father's funeral, and you learn that this soldier has the flu, right? And brings it into the town, and thus the disruption happens, right? And I feel like that kind of fits in with the vignette part that you're talking about, where it subverts that formalistic expectation of as well. The vignettes?
You said vignette for a second there.
Sorry. Vignettes.
It's a vignette.
Vignette. It's a big ass net.
But yeah, so that's just to give an idea of what it is, and it actually can be a very useful tool in storytelling. Yep. It serves both a purpose, like if you want to just sort of do a larger character study, or if you want to do or if you want to use it to manipulate an overarching story.
Yeah, that's true. Right.
Sometimes we get sketches where like the vignette will be the same event from multiple perspectives. Plenty of TV shows have kind of done that as like a famous storytelling device, like that episode of The Simpsons.
Yeah. Not the clip show.
No, the one with like oh god. But it was literally like the same story or the same timeline of events from a bunch of different perspectives.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, but that one. Yeah.
Anyway, like again, just vignettes can help provide puzzle pieces to paint a much larger picture. Essentially, exactly. It's their tool.
Yeah.
Individually, they don't do much, but together they can do something great.
Yeah. And what would you say is like the larger picture that's trying to be painted here in this particular play?
Of Unity? I
mean, like literally Unity?
No. I was just saying the name.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think it's about just sort of the reaction almost to, because pandemics have a very central, very interesting thing where, unlike war or even unlike an act of terror, sometimes they really bring death to our doorstep. And I think that's the play is really about, is how do we, like, the response to death almost.
Yeah.
Which is why it's so fascinating that this is classified as dark comedy, because it means like the response to death, laugh.
Yeah. There's like, for people like who haven't read the play, which I don't think it was like a super popular play, so I would be very surprised that a lot of people did, but it does have some really darkly comedic moments where one of the character there's a scene, right? The scene where the soldier Hart, Private Hart, arrives at the train station, right? And he's the soldier who has the flu, right? And mirroring history, you find out that he was stationed, or he came back directly from Halifax, right? So the plague literally sweeping from east to west. But there's a moment when he arrives and this other citizen of Unity is passing by, and his wife had just died, right? Not of the flu, but of childbirth. And it's very sad, traumatic at first. And as a reader, you know what's coming, because you know that Hart, or at least you expect that Hart is the carrier, because it's supposed to be a play about the flu. But suddenly the humor is broken, because the guy who's carrying his wife to the mortician is carrying her in a wheelbarrow and drops her. And it's a terribly sad moment, but it's just also very goofy, because it's this idiot tripping over a wheelbarrow with his dead wife in it. And so you can't help but kind of laugh at the absurdity of it, even though it's darkly, right, like it's darkly tragic, but also very funny, because it's a guy tripping over himself and his dead wife.
Well, I know it's probably the point, but it makes me think of, I know they probably were doing a bit of, it makes me think of the Monty Python bit at the start of Holy Grail. I'm not dead. Yes, you are.
Yes. right? The reason why it's so funny is because it subverts your expectations of death, right? And the joke is now dead because you're removing, like you're explaining the joke, and so it doesn't make it funny anymore. But like that's the kind of dark humor that you find in here. But it's, I think from a storytelling perspective, it does so much, right? It's ultimately, I think you're right, just a play about the nature of change as brought on by pandemics, right? But just like from a storytelling and thematic and symbolic level, like this play nails it, right? Like Hart is blinded, right? He's
The heart is blind.
yeah, right. Like Hart as a soldier, obviously his name kind of indicates that as well, but he's the guy with the pandemic, with the flu. So like you get this sense that the flu is indiscriminate because its carrier, its original carrier, cannot see, right? So he just gives it to anyone, which is fantastic, and makes it all the more interesting to consider pandemics in the context that we were talking about at the
Wait, so
start
you're
of the episode.
saying since they ignored the disabled guy, the pandemic ended up spreading even more?
Almost, actually.
And thus the wheel turns again.
Kind of, actually. You can, I don't know if that was intentional on Care's part. It might have been, but say more about that. Why would this be interesting?
Oh, I guess it probably is unintentional commentary, but you know what? The author is dead. Long live the author. So, and this play is designed for many interpretations. There's a certain dramatic irony, especially like if you were going to make a 2019 version of this play, which I think we can almost kind of do, and I think it would be almost kind of fun as a thought project to do.
Sure.
But it's, how do I say it? It's sort of funny to sort of look at like the idea of like, oh, we were only thinking about certain people's getting the disease and ignoring other parts of the system. Therefore, the system failed even more.
Yeah.
And it's sort of it's a common consequence throughout, you know. It's what we're not gonna. It's also the fact that it's the blind person that they're ignoring. We're not like literally not looking at the problem right now.
Yes, exactly. Right. Which is great. Where you're only seeing, what you're only seeing is the forward facing and the evident, right? Which at the time would have been the First World War. And people obviously like focused a lot on that because millions of people died, right? But millions more people are about to die from something that you're, as you're saying, completely ignoring, right? And so it is kind of interesting because the play does talk about this in very interesting ways where we kind of romanticize some aspects of war. The brave, heroic soldier sacrificing his life for the mother country or whatever. But the people who are dying from the flu or the flu itself, which is heavily coded in military language, as we were talking about at the start of the episode, where we just have to constantly go on the war against something, whether it's the people who are supposedly carrying the flu, in this case, the big other, the Spanish, the Chinese, the Jews, whatever, right? But there's not a single type of romanticism attached to this fight, right? It's just this disgusting thing that needs to be eradicated, right? And I think that that's kind of interesting with like our deliberate obfuscations and ways of seeing that also ties into the blindness of Hart, right, as a symbolic figure. Again, I don't know if that made sense or if it was just like rambling, the ramblings of a mad person, but I don't know if you had any thoughts on that.
No, I think
wanted to keep going on it.
I think we could dive into the sort of symbols and the ironies with like we haven't even touched on the fact the use of the veteran in our sort of modern world interpretation, maybe on the status of a veteran in a pandemic, because we can't look like we literally just can't look at this without connecting it at the moment to COVID-19.
It's impossible.
I know I can't. Like, yeah, no, I can't. Bias and unconscious lenses, like it's going to change the way I look at this play forever.
And of course, like,
And so-
it's Care wrote this 20 years before the pandemic hit. So like this was in no way intentional, but it's just like it's inevitable to see parallels in the pandemic, right? And anyway,
so when was the book released? Oh yeah, 2000. Oh, so this came out in 2002.
Yeah.
So then hold on a second. But if he might have not been talking about that one, but he might have been talking about any other kind of like epidemics and pandemics. There's still plenty that have been happening all the time.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, there you
Ebola.
go. Yeah, Ebola has been a big one. The HIV/AIDS epidemic, pandemic, that would have been a big one. Any sort of like, there's so many modern century ones that he could have also been talking about. And now that I know that he wrote this not in the midst of a pandemic or epidemic, I think it really does add on to that. It can be anything. Like you can just substitute this in for anything. And I think that's the point. Anything that brings conspiracy, death to people's doorstep will create a similar situation and reaction. It could be the Red Scare. This is 2002. So it's a post 9/11 world.
Yeah.
It's a post 9/11 world. It could literally just be then swap epidemic out for suspected terrorists.
Absolutely.
Part is the terrorist hiding among them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, that he's not exactly that, just because he's looked at very sympathetically from the people in the town. I think in part because he is a soldier.
No, but I think I'm saying in general, like it's not maybe specific. But the idea is like there's always something that will like set people off this way, and normalcy in that way is very fragile.
Yeah,
our self belief in normalcy, that is.
Yeah, very much. And well, I think like we've already been talking for almost an hour at this point, and I think this has been a really cool discussion. But like, I don't know, do you want to spend the rest of the episode just going over a few key moments of the play that you thought were kind of cool and indicate some of the things that we're talking about? Because I know you have some that you brought up, like you wrote some in the notes. Like, do you want to go over a couple and kind of go from there? Because I think we hit on the key elements of the play that we like.
I feel everything we need to talk about.
All right.
But let's talk about some of these key quotes. Hold on. So I think we can. I would be mind if we just dump down to death and our approach to it, and also closest thing Canadians had to a war at home. I think both of those could work.
Let's do it.
Awesome. So I'll start with one of mine then.
Go for it.
Awesome. So my first one was page 64.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a double whammy one. This is a double whammy of a quote, or a little section, I guess. Since this is a play, it's going to be a couple lines of dialogue. There you go. Ta-da. The door bursts open with a bang, and Senna enters carrying a body wrapped in a blanket over her shoulders. She drops it onto the table. So first, death and the carrying of a corpse is normal now. Like it's almost literally carried like a sack of potatoes. Is that you, Senna? Yes, I'm just here talking with Beatrice here. I see. See. So where were you off to? Dent Farm. Oh, did you bring somebody home? Yes. Oh, that's too bad. What happened? Fell in front of the motor. Don't know how. Oh my God, he did it and it killed him? Yes. Shame. Oh my God, who? Alfred Spooner. Oh no, did you know him, Beatrice? Oh no, he's their last boy. So I highlighted this section because I think it highlights a really important part of these epidemics, attacks, whatever you want to call them, and that's the sort of causation of death. He didn't die from the disease, technically, but the disease caused his death. The disease made him fall over and get his head cut off by a lawnmower, which is both... Again,
another darkly comedic moment.
Yeah. Oh, it's an incredibly darkly comedic moment. Like he was literally killed by having, in many ways, he was literally killed by societal pressures. Huge epidemic going on, but he still has to go out and mow the lawn because it's normal. And we crave a sense of routine and normalcy as well. That's another part of it. There's the societal pressures of having a neat trim lawn for your neighbors, so that way that bitch Susan from the neighborhood association isn't on your ass all the time, or isn't calling the cops because the old people think around the lakeside cottage that you're making too much noise, which I was not making too much noise, goddammit. I was making a perfectly suitable amount of noise for a bunch of 18 to 21-year-olds chilling at a nice lakeside cottage in the middle of the summer. But whatever. We'll talk about that later. I'm not venting about anything. Gosh. But no,
Yeah.
it's how many, like, yeah, we have the amount of deaths from COVID and the pandemic, but then how many deaths came from the fact that people weren't able to get work? And so therefore they had to starve to death. How many people lost their homes during the pandemic and are now homeless, which is going to lead to their death? How many other, like, and I'm like, this is beyond just like how much did COVID cause other diseases? Like people, like it made it easier for pneumonia to keep people. That's one thing. But I'm talking about like there's 1,000 branches to that conversation. And it's you can talk about it in any other thing. So let's say an act of terror kills such and such amount of people. And then because of that, little Jimmy, who's never actually lived in the Middle East his entire life and is a second or third generation immigrant, starts getting bullied at school. And then the bullying gets so bad, he dies by suicide. That's still a result from the attack of terror.
Absolutely.
Like it's nonstop. And I think this sort of like this darkly humorous moment really highlights that sort of like these things are so unbelievably interconnected. The other thing from 64 that I found, the use of soldiers. So that's on page 65, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Blah, blah. Horrified sounds. Then Beatrice just turns and exits the mortuary. I wish I could be of some help. It's fine. What have you been doing? Listen to the phone for a while. Lots of people talking about the flu. Where do the coffins come from? We build them in the shed. Wood comes in from Saskatoon. Maybe I can help you put them together. You might need a lot soon. I think the flu is being spread by soldiers coming home. This sort of...
Probably right.
Yeah. Once again, it's almost this darkly humorous thing of the flu is fighting using soldiers. It's using them as weapons or whatever. And this idea, it's swap soldiers out with any authority figure. And these times where you have these authority figures that then bring the danger themselves in some ways. Sometimes unfairly. Again, from a more modern lens, I can't help but think about like cops, I guess.
Yeah. Or the people that were just the politicians and all that who were continuing to go across the world on their trips and pretending like people didn't know that they were doing that, right? But they were probably
going to islands or whatever.
Yeah. Which, are even more affected, as you were saying, because they're isolated. Right? Like, so they were double whammying those people.
I do say, my name is Benoit Blanc, and great movie, great satire.
I like that passage as well because just the line, we build them in the shed, wood comes in from Saskatoon, points to another thing that you see typically in epidemics or pandemics as this attempt to return to normal, right? Or to keep as much normalcy as possible. So you were bringing up the mower before, but the idea of the economy keeping itself going is also important in the passage that you brought up, right? Wood comes in from Saskatoon, this thing of like, well, we have to keep things going in order to...
You can almost hear the joke about how this is great business for coffin makers right now.
There you go. Yeah. But someone has to profit from it.
The gravedigger's doing great right now. He's fine. And I think I also think being
cynical, but really... you see this. Yeah, and being cynical, but you see this all the time. Like people very quickly were like, well, we need to keep some businesses going because otherwise everything is going to collapse.
I need to be able to go to the hairstylist of all things.
Right. Which you do. Like, that is true. But also,
I need to go to restaurants, man. I need to brunch, god damn it. I need my Instagram photos on my fucking brunch plate. If I don't get my goddamn photos of my eggs goddamn Benedict with the delicious hollandaise sauce on them, how will people know that I'm cultured?
I know we've talked about this before, but I keep forgetting where that quote is from.
Which quote?
The eggs Benedict one. I think we've talked about this before.
Oh, I'm just substituting it. I don't think it's a specific quote. I think we're just lampooning society. I'm just lampooning.
I'm sure you had mentioned that one before. Anyway, doesn't matter. What were you going to say before? About
so the other thing I think this little passage brings up really well is actually, in a more positive note, the very reactive nature of civilization and humanity. This big pandemic has come up. The blind man is volunteering to build coffins. Poor Sana is carrying in the body to take care of it, to prepare it before it goes back to the family. Like, in these grave moments of disaster, humanity, I find, has a great capacity to help and react. We're just not very good at the proactive bit.
Right. Yeah. Or it takes a lot of, I
It's a
guess.
lot of work.
Yes. Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm trying to pick. Yeah, I'll go with this passage because it at least slightly differs from what you were saying, which I think were two really good ones. This is more towards the beginning. This is on page 22, but I just thought it was an interesting use of stage directions and a little bit of the dialogue after. So as you were saying, there's very few stage directions, but I think when Care uses them, it's very effective.
Yes, for sure.
Where there's an interaction between Michael, who's basically a farmhand, and Beatrice, who's the main character. And we say, the stage direction says, Michael has stopped working and walked downstage. There's a sudden sound of a door slamming like a gunshot as he enters the kitchen. Beatrice shrieks. Michael, hello, Buzz. Bea, oh, you scared me, Glenn. What? Don't sneak in like that. Who's Glenn? What? You just called me Glenn. No, I didn't. Yes, you did. You said, oh, you scared me, Glenn. Who's Glenn? And while this doesn't relate directly to the epidemic or the flu itself, I do think it was a very indicative passage, especially the idea of slamming like a gunshot, because it relates back to what we were talking about before and what you were saying of the war at home, right? The World War One itself was never fought on Canadian soil, right? It was a European war almost entirely, right? But it's as the soldiers are coming back and ostensibly the war has ended that an actual conflict is beginning, and Care verbally and through stage directions is indicating that in very interesting ways, right? Of both the militarization of our vocabulary of war, and we can talk about that if you want, like in more depth, of the war on X, right? Which you mentioned before we started recording, but also just how symbolically and formalistically, like, this is as close to a conflict that Canada will see really for a long time, right? At least on its own soil, right? And arguably has as much impact on how Canadian society will be shaped going forward as World War One as an actual conflict had, right? Because it fundamentally changed how healthcare was done. It fundamentally reimagined, right, who was important in society. It asked people all kinds of questions about how connected we were. So fundamentally, like, this was a huge moment. And I think this particular passage really points to this, just with the gunshot thing. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add on that, but yeah. Yeah, did you want to talk a little bit about that militarization aspect that we keep alluding to? Because you brought it up before we started recording, like the war on poverty, the war on drugs, the war on whatever.
I mean, we've touched on it, I think, a fair bit already. This idea, and essentially the idea is pretty like, whenever these things happen, and I think this is part of the reason why these things keep happening on repeat, we treat them always as a battle. It's an othering, it's a war. The war on drugs, the war on terror, poverty, the war on COVID-19. It's like we have to treat this as some kind of battle to win, when often the more complex solution, for sure, but often what would be probably the faster and better solution is not as a war, but as a like an issue almost. I don't know. It's hard to sort of put into words, but there's a very combative nature to these sorts of things.
Yeah, you're right. Like it avoids the structural and systemic issues like so much.
Yes, exactly. It's very much an isolated event. It's just a war. It's just a battle. We're just fighting right now, and then we'll get back to what we were doing before.
It's like, to take the easy example of the war on drugs, right, which started in the 60s. It's like, oh, if we just, arrest enough people or stop enough drug dealers, the problem will be
Mhm.
solved. Was like, well, no. Why are people turning towards drugs, both as
Mhm.
users and as sellers? Oh, because of depression or social inequalities? Are you going to solve that? No, then people are still going to be using drugs. Like, I'm sorry, right? In the context of the pandemic, right? It's less a context of, well, I mean, there is this idea of like a systemic issue of lack of health and safety
Mhm.
regulations, right? Of course, that's part of it. We've already talked about that. But what I think is kind of interesting about the militarization of this is that the pandemic helps to, at least in the Spanish flu, helps to expose the inequalities that are not yet evident or are not yet
Mhm.
fully addressed in Canadian society, right?
I mean,
Um,
it exposed the problems with this one too. It's just we didn't do much about them.
exactly, right? And that's what's even more depressing about the COVID one is that we know about this now,
Yeah.
right? Whereas again, you could at best claim that a lot of people did not know or were not aware of it because of the lack of communication and education. But now in the 21st century, in a world where people are more educated than ever and more connected than ever, that should not be a thing, but it still is. And that's what makes it worse. But you know, in the context of the Spanish flu, what it kind of exposed were like the gendered inequalities, right? Where often women
Yeah.
were the ones who had to end up taking care of a lot of these people, of the sick, right? Because
Yeah.
of midwives and so on being nurses, and were often affected a lot more as mothers and just as patients. Obviously, minorities were affected a huge amount. Indigenous people were affected because they were doubly isolated and no one gave a shit, right? The poor were affected. And so it
Mm.
helped generate all of these, or at least expose all of these inequalities that, as far as changes to society were concerned, were very much, I think, instigated um, by the aftermath of the flu, right? Where you see all kinds of labor conflicts after, as people realize that the poor are even more vulnerable than ever before, right?
Right.
Women's rights were brought to the forefront, and part of the rhetoric that you saw in North America was like, "Hey, we did a lot to help in the war and during the flu."
Nice.
Like, so all of these things I think are really interesting to think about. Again, don't know if I'm rambling, but
Mhm.
yeah, just thought we should mention that at least because it's an important one.
No, I think yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Did you
Single
have?
brain cell moment.
I'm sorry.
Single brain cell moment right there. Both just go awesome.
um, okay. Did you have another passage, or shall I go for a second one, and then we'll call it?
Hold on. Yes. Actually, I did find one that I thought was more just funny.
Okay, go for it.
So
And then I have like one
this is
that's
on
dark.
page 68, 69.
Mm-hmm.
In the telegraph office, Rose and Doris are weaving masks, camper sacks around their necks, and are brewing a foul-smelling concoction on the wood stove. Mary runs up and knocks at the door. Who's there? It's Mary. Let me in. Where's your mask? Let me in. And it's Richard. Give her some. Drink this first. What? Drink it. It'll kill germs. It kills germs. Drink it. Ow, it's hot. She's got to drink it fast. Don't sip it, girl. Drink it down. Ow, it's burning. It's no good if it cools. Is it cooling? No, my mouth is burnt. I'm not sick. Please let me in. Give her the mask. Put this on. Mary puts on the mask and is allowed in. What is it? Why the panic? It's Richard. Oh, Dove. It's a mistake. I'm sorry, sweet. It's someone else. Love. Another Richard. No, Sid, it's terrible, but we must be thankful. This, like, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I don't just mean from the use of masks. I also mean from the very home brewed. I think there's something very specific being said with the fact that it's like a couple of what seems to be old ladies with their what's the word? What's the phrase again? Wives' tales? What is it?
No, no, no.
Um,
They're like homebrew medicine or something like
yeah, no,
they're
but there's like a specific thing for
yeah,
that,
yeah,
like
yeah. Remedies, not remedies, but like
no, it's like fuck. It's an old wives' tale. You know, it's these old wives' solutions.
yeah. I know what you're talking about, but yes. Anyway,
Yeah, and
that.
it's fascinating how often these things will come up in the face of these problems. Like
Yeah.
real medicine doesn't really need to be cool or hot.
Yeah. But
Medicine's
it is
just
kind of
medicine.
interesting because there's a whole like resurgence in like medical discourse of people saying like, well, there's also some level to acknowledge of the patient knowing what's best for them, right? And I think there is some truth to that, right? That's not me discounting medical advice, by the way. I do like I do think doctors do very good work a lot of the time. Um, but again, like I think this passage points to this duality, right, of people simultaneously knowing and doing what has seemingly worked for a long time, right? But you're right. There is something darkly funny about like just throw something at the wall and see what sticks. I don't know. this is this is something that none of us have ever encountered before. So I guess no. What was it like? Injecting bleach during the COVID pandemic was apparently something that people were
Oh
doing,
my
or something
God, there
like
was
that.
all sorts of like there's all sorts of dumb shit people were doing for homeless.
This it's so weird. Um. Anyway, stupid people. But yeah, I love this passage. Thank you so much for bringing that one up.
Oh,
God
it's
knows what it was that they actually mixed together. It's still
oh my God,
funny.
the fact that it was burning like that.
Yeah. Oh.
Oh,
All right. The last passage that I had was actually at the end. It was the last vignette, as you were saying. One that is before last vignette, I should say, that is appropriately called the apocalypse, which ties in with my previous one, where spoilers, Beatrice dies of the flu.
oh no.
And the start of the vignette, right? The apocalypse starts with a stage direction that says, Sissy sits by the body of Beatrice, who is laid out on the bed. Suna stands nearby. O Beatrice, and in those days men shall seek death, and shall not find it, and they shall desire to die, and death shall fly from them. Sissy picks up Beatrice's diary and reads the final entry while Suna examines the corpse and measures it. Sissy, November 28th, 1918. Today was the day the world was to come to an end. A relief for some, a disappointment for others that in fact still continues, much like it did yesterday or the day before. My sister has recovered quickly from the flu. She's always been a little faster at most things than a normal person. I'm a little under the weather, but not needed so much right now. So it's not so inconvenient. We won the war, so quite a few people feel a little bit relieved about all of that. And winter is here, a promise of darkness and cold for some time. But for me, the world is brighter than it's ever been before. I kissed a boy a few days back. I still feel him on my lips. He was very, very. The entry stops there. Sissy closes the book, touches Bea. Sissy, lucky. That notion of the apocalypse, I think, is super important, right? And interesting to remember. Obviously, there's like pestilence, which is a horseman of the apocalypse. Like you can make that relation there, which I don't think the play really plays with. You don't see any of the four other horsemen. I mean, technically, you see death, but no, actually, what are the four horsemen? Is pestilence, war, death? What's the other one? Famine?
Yeah. Pestilence, war, death, and famine.
Yeah. I don't remember famine being one of them. Anyway, but it is it's still interesting, right? This idea of what the apocalypse symbolizes, because a lot of people, when they imagine the apocalypse, they imagine just the end, right? It's no more. But what this passage points to, and what I feel is particularly enlightening, and it's what makes it a surprisingly good and uplifting ending despite the dark tone, is the fact that Beatrice's death symbolizes, right, this opening up towards a new world, right? Because as we've talked about before, the First World War really instigated the 20th century. It had been technically around for like going 2 decades at this point, but this is really what brings in the 20th century and all of its goods and bad, right? So this idea of the apocalypse, which both the flu and the war could have represented, bringing in something, a brave new world, so to speak, is, I think, perfectly represented by this passage. Yeah, sorry, you looked like you were going to say something.
No, not at the moment.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that pretty much covers everything I wanted to talk about this play. Anything you wanted to address finally before we call it there? We've been talking for like an hour and a half at those points.
Yeah. I don't know. This should be about it. I can't think of it. I think we've touched on all the topics pretty strongly with this play. I think it'll just get like, it'll be more relevant as time goes on, I think.
Sure. I feel like we made a joke about us being a bit late. I feel like the distance from the pandemic is going to help though, because people made commentary on the pandemic so fast. People got tired of it. I think the distance will help us here, but yeah, or hinder us, and no one was going to want to hear it. I don't know.
Who knows? And I think it'll be fun. I think we had a good conversation with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. As we finish up this episode, I do want to mention something, like, to the people who actually did listen to the very end of this episode. You'll have to listen to like a very saccharine moment here, but the show, in terms of sheer numbers and listenership and engagement, actually did increase this year, right? Like our listenership, I think, went up by like 40% this year, which is huge.
That's wild.
Yeah, I had there's an equivalent of Spotify Wrapped for podcasters that was given up. And like, this is just on Spotify, so assume it's similar on other platforms, but like, we really grew this year. And yeah, just thank you for all of those new listeners or old time listeners. Like, that's really cool, right? So I just wanted to mention that. Our next episode, have you ever read Michael Ondaatje's In the Skin of a Lion?
No, I know about Michael Ondaatje, but I have not read The Skin of a Lion.
Okay, it's really good. I think it'll be up your alley.
Awesome. I'm excited now.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about that novel and just kind of like what's happening in the 1920s in Canada, right? And especially because Mac will have no excuse to not read it, because he's going to have like a vacation. He's going to have like a 30-hour flight.
14.
Whatever. You're still going to have enough time to read through it.
Yeah.
Download it on your phone or whatever through archive.org and you'll find it.
God.
But yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. And yeah, you could support us through all of those things that we mentioned at the start of the show, or just leave a review, do all of that good stuff. And honestly, thank you for listening and doing all of that. Yeah, all of that stuff. Yeah. I'm tired, and I'm like 2 glasses of wine into the evening, so I'm starting to ramble.
I'm hungry. I'm tired.
Yep. All right. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.